Hello everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Nathan Gaming, where today we are watching another reaction by this time another creator besides Major Kill. This is one of the ones that I mentioned in that video. This is Wes Hammer. Wes Hammer recently released a new video talking about everyone's favorite hateable little gremlin, Leandros. And so I thought, why not give it a watch? I've also adjusted my mic settings, hopefully that it doesn't sound nearly as, I wouldn't say as muffled or compressed as it sounds in my other videos. So I am aware of that issue. I have been working to get the volume uh, to a degree where it's actually workable. But anyways, yeah. So that being said, Wes Hammer is the kind of guy that I usually go to when it comes to just like, really asking some interesting questions. He asks a lot of interesting questions, really. He's kind of the more like he gives you lore details about a lot of things, but then he goes into predominantly like speculative territory about some things. Like he likes to ask questions, and I can get behind that to some degree. Anyways, I had to watch this a little bit because I just adjusted my audio so I could get it to, you know, not suck. But anyways, yeah. That being said, let's just go ahead and delve right into it. Please go like and subscribe. Feel free to support the original creator, please, and thank you. And with that out of the way, let's go ahead and just delve right into it.
Leandros did nothing wrong is a phrase that for many within the 40K community, it probably generates a visceral feeling of disgust. And for good reason. He's easily the most hated character in the entire franchise. And not the good kind of hated like Erebus or Lucius, where they're really well written and the whole point is that you're supposed to hate them. Leandros is just annoying. He whinges and complains about everything Captain Titus, and by proxy we as the players, attempt to do. For many, his name has become synonymous with betrayal and cowardice, which is the exact opposite of what an Ultramarine is supposed to be.
I mean, again, I've mentioned this before when I was playing Space Marines 2 for the first time, debuting as a VTuber. The interesting problem with Leandros is that this is actually how a true to form like a true to form Ultramarine would probably behave. Like Leandros quite literally behaves exactly as an Ultramarine should in this time and era. He is a character who is hated for exactly what he is and what everybody else is, but he specifically tends to undermine and question even his own superiors, which that's kind of a nice quality to have for some soldiers, for a lot of soldiers, really. But when it comes to this degree to where, like, there's clear and obvious benefit to what the commander is doing, what your commanding officer is doing, and you undermining their authority just kind of gets in the way of things more so than it tends to solve them. It does tend to get in the way of actually, getting shit done. And, as men, okay, as guys, we care more about getting shit done than we do about bitching about ethics and the moral efficacies of what we're actually doing. That's pretty much the biggest problem with Leandros is that he's essentially he's just a problem child. He is a contrarian for the sake of being a contrarian. He does not actually say these things out of a sheer willingness to actually want to improve the chapter. He doesn't say this with a clear and obvious willingness to make sure that everyone stays above board. Like there's like some actual like mental coherence and kosher between like the soldiers, particularly his superior and the vet that he's working with in this particular sortie in this mission. He doesn't care. He doesn't care about any of that because if he did, he would have recognized the fact that Titus is still Titus and that he is still the captain, and that to undermine your captain's authority, despite the fact, right, that Titus has proven, beyond reasonable doubt that he is still capable of making clear and rational decisions that do benefit the cause, especially the mission, even though he's lugging around an object that is basically warp energy incarnate. I think there, because you have to understand there is a certain level of degree where his fucking bullshitting just doesn't make sense, and it tends to grate more often than it does. I can understand the skepticism. Everyone can understand the skepticism. Leandros lives at a time where witch hunting is kind of a norm. But this is a level of just sheer bullshittery that even people like myself who would understandably see this and would think to themselves, I can see a person like Leandros existing in this time period. I can see how people like Leandros would exist a dime a dozen, right? We could recognize that. We could see that. We could certainly agree with that statement. It doesn't change the fact that he's still a fucking annoying piece of shit for doing the things that he does. Moving on.
It's honestly pretty difficult to go anywhere 40K's lore is being discussed, whether online or in person, without somebody jumping out of the woodwork to exclaim just how much they hate this character.
The Codex has started
dedicated specifically to hating on him, which admittedly isn't 100% unique, but it's still pretty impressive. Here's the thing though. What if I was to tell you that despite the numerous reasons why hating on this character is justified, a large portion of that hate is actually being misdirected and based on misconceptions? What if Leandros was actually right about everything? Now, I know that's kind of hard to even consider. Leandros isn't some larger-than-life, morally complex anti-villain, the type that seem to be way overused in media nowadays, that we can debate their ethics and morals. However, in recent times, I've personally been seeing a lot of hot takes about this character that don't seem to make any sense. Some of them are rather tame, and I can kind of sort of understand where they come from. Whereas others, and I'm gonna put this as lightly as possible, are wildly unhinged and miss the entire point of what 40K is all about. So today I want to do something a little bit different. I don't want to just explain why everybody hates a certain character. I want to try to play devil's advocate for them and actually defend the most hated character in all of 40K. I'm anticipating this video being a little bit more controversial than normal, and I'm definitely interested to hear what y'all's take is on this one in the comment section. Just do me a favor and hear me out, wait till the end of the video before you get out your pitchforks and torches. In this video, we're going to be talking about whether or not Leandros actually disrespected the chain of command when he summoned the Inquisition at the end of the first game. We're going to talk about the events of Space Marine 1 from his perspective, and we're going to dive into whether or not him becoming a chaplain was actually secretly a punishment. We're going to talk about all that and a whole lot more in this one, but before we dive headfirst into the grimdark, a quick shout out to this video's sponsor.
Okay, before we get into the sponsor segment, I find that the idea that him becoming a chaplain, I want to know his reason. I'm kind of curious about his reasoning as to why he thinks that Leandros becoming a chaplain was more so a punishment than anything else. I mean, I don't know if there's like a process to becoming a chaplain or if there's some type of strict efficacy about being a chaplain that's just kind of like, it's a bit limiting as a space marine. I'm not sure what he means when he says that it might have actually been a punishment for him to become a chaplain, but I want to make this clear, right? Leandros at the end of the game went to the Inquisition. He had outed himself as going to the Inquisition and basically got an Inquisitor to come over and basically arrest Titus for suspected warp corruption and heresy. And that's a level of... See, everything else in the game could have been excused, right? It's just little notches on an already perfect setting. We have a character who basically trusts the commander. He's basically the best bro. And he's an old man who's seen it all. And then we have Leandros, who's still bright-eyed, still fresh to things, still relies on the Codex Astartes as a fucking manual for how to do things. And he's got a bit of a chip on his shoulder. We got all the types, right? We got all the types. The problem with Leandros' reputation in terms of why people hate him so much, in my opinion, right, is that I believe it's all of these things, but I think the thing that really broke the camel's back for many people is exactly what Wes Hammer just said. He literally did not go to the chaplain. He did not go to any of the usual. He did not go through the usual channels to report the suspected warp corruption or potential heresy to of Titus, his own compromise to like his own captain's compromise to anyone else who it might concern. He went straight to the top. He went straight to the Inquisition to basically sort this mess out. He weeded out all of the middlemen and basically got a third party to come in, and it's just like, hey, I hear you might be suspected of heresy. You know, that's the kind of shit that gets most people stabbed. That's the kind of shit that if you did that kind of thing in California, you would get absolutely bodied. All right, there's a reason why, right? The old saying "snitches get stitches" is something you will also hear echoed, especially in some parts of California, because it's absolutely true. You do not get away with being a fucking snitch. And you certainly don't get away with being just an annoying troublemaker. It's actually kind of funny that that's kind of the behavior of how the internet operates, but the internet has a bit more leeway because, you can't it's not like you actually have to deal with these people. Like they have like people on the internet could just snitch all as much as they want because, like or just be an asshole as much as they want because, like it's the internet. I mean, despite the fact that saying certain things is probably, like in person is probably going to get you punched in the face in real life, the internet makes it easy for you to basically not face the consequences of saying damning things for stupid reasons. But anyways, yeah, that's just neither here or there. Point being, I think that, Leandros' main issue is that he just does not care about, despite the fact that he's all about doing things the right way, doing things in the way that makes sense, going through usual channels, following the Codex Astartes. He basically went against, like the usual channels. He like what any normal Astartes would have done, what any prudent individual would have done, and go straight to like like their chapter's chaplain, like maybe a few other places, maybe even Caligar himself. No, he just went straight to the Inquisition, and it just kind of makes him look like a fucking hypocrite. It makes him look like a massive fucking hypocrite for doing that. Again, I would like to see more of a delve into the actual makeup of his character, like why it is that he's such a, like he's such an unreasonable asshole, why he has such a massive chip on his shoulder, why he seems to, like, be so questioning of the authority around him, because he seems like a character who has a reason, potentially, right? He seems like a character who could have a genuine reason for this, but we just don't see that because the game wants to paint him as the villain first, and then we'll ask the questions later. Even in Space Marines 2, where we had an ample opportunity to maybe flesh him out a little bit as a character, like he was basically gone for most of the game, and we didn't realize until near the end that he was actually the chaplain who's been giving us orders and has been giving us wants us to give him progress reports among other things, right? Like it's going to be interesting to see how they try to like either humanize or further demonize his character in future entries, but that's neither here or there.
Now, I know this is going to come as a surprise to a few of you because I've definitely let myself go over the last year. Life's been pretty crazy, but I'm actually super big into exercising and going to the gym. I genuinely love lifting weights, swimming, really anything except for running. Not a fan of that. I got them short corgi legs. The big problem for me was pad thai. But aside from that,
I don't have that problem. My mother gave me decent legs.
That I actually like.
I actually have longer legs than most things on my body.
Casual enough. But that all changed when I found Fabletics, the sponsor of this video. I've been wearing my Fabletics for about a month now, and so far I'm ridiculously impressed. The material is both super comfortable and breathable without feeling flimsy. And best of all, their outfits just look sick. If you didn't know, I live down in Florida, and sweltering is pretty much the only word that accurately describes the weather here. Which sucks because I'm huge into cycling as my main form of cardio, and I can only really do that comfortably about half the year. But thanks to the sweat-wicking fabric that Fabletics uses, I'm able to get my miles in comfortably even in the middle of a Florida summer. But it gets even better, because if you sign up as a VIP, you get a frankly insane intro offer. I'm talking 80% off the entire site. And you heard me right, 80% off the entire site. I thought that sounded ridiculous when they first told me that, but apparently it's true. Not only that, every month you get a credit that scores you a 2-piece outfit or any product worth up to $100. And that's not all. Included in the VIP perks are monthly drops, early access to styles, VIP-only sales, a free membership to the Fit app, and the entire thing is super flexible. You can skip any month between the 1st and the 5th without being charged. So if you want to experience some of the most comfortable, good-looking clothes on the market, then click on my link in the description to get 80% off site-wide when you sign up as a VIP. Big thanks to Fabletics for sponsoring this video. We were first introduced to the characters of Leandros and Captain Titus all the way back on September 6, 2011, with the release of the original Space Marine game. Although I and many other 40K fans absolutely loved this game, the sales numbers don't lie. The first game was a success for sure, but it never reached the heights of the big hitters of the time like Halo or Call of Duty. Meanwhile, Space Marine 2 sold over 7 million copies, bringing in a massive new wave of players, most of whom had no idea how big of a deal it was when the chaplain of the game finally took his helmet off at the end and revealed Leandros' soft, pudgy, punchable face that us old-school fans absolutely despise. It's actually kind of amazing. Normally, a twist ending like that would get the audience hyped, but this might have been the first.
So, a quick aside. Who has a more punchable face? Andrew Wilson or fucking Leandros? Or Bobby Kotick? Oh yeah, I should probably clarify. I did not realize this when I make these comments sometimes, but Andrew Wilson is apparently a very popular name in a lot of media, because apparently there's Andrew Wilson, the authority on dating culture on the Add Whatever podcast, and talks about, debates people about like the shithole that is the dating scene and men's, I guess you could say, I guess the MRA. I guess he might be a representative of that as well. He's basically like the face of, of essentially like the red pill thing. The red pill movements. I mean, like, and that's just debatable. It's just like, he seems like the more to be fair to Andrew though, he seems like the most reasonable out of most of the people. He's certainly fucking Myron from Fresh and Fit, among other places, but like, you get the point. I think that it's just funny that there's multiple Andrew Wilsons or multiple people in positions of infamy or a sense of influence that have the similar name. And so when I say Andrew Wilson, I don't mean Andrew Wilson from the Whatever podcast. I mean Andrew Wilson from EA, which is funny. I have yet to see anyone get confused by that, but I thought I should just make that clear, because I did not realize that there were people in these content creation spaces that shared the same name and were very notorious. But yeah, I just thought I'd make that clear. But yeah, who do you think has a more punchable face, Leandros or Andrew Wilson? Or Bobby Kotick? Feel free to let me know in the comments.
First time I've ever seen the exact opposite happen. Everyone was loving this chaplain. He seemed like a no-nonsense badass. Then, all of a sudden, boom, it's Leandros, and all that goodwill vanished in a split second. I've got to imagine that most of the new fans were completely confused. They didn't understand why we were so angry. They don't know how he betrayed Captain Titus at the end of the first game. They don't know how his rigid devotion to the Codex Astartes made him unable to think for himself. They don't know how this arrogant rookie broke the chain of command and committed one of the biggest sins a Space Marine can. He snitched to the Inquisition. Now, that's the version of the story that most of the fan base has internalized, and I'll admit, I believed this myself for many years. But after recently replaying through both games, I gotta be honest, I'm starting to see Leandros a little bit differently. A lot of what I thought I knew way back when I originally played this game over a decade ago was based on old misconceptions that I had back then when I didn't know nearly as much about 40K as I do now. So this video is going to be my attempt to play devil's advocate for 40K's most hated character. First, we're going to do a super abridged recap of the first game, but from Leandros' perspective. Then we'll dive into the meat and potatoes of this video, where I break down and challenge the strongest arguments that fans have made against him over the years. Okay, so let's get into it. The first Space Marine game opens up with the Forge world of Graia being under siege by orcs, who have breached orbit and seized control of key anti-air defenses. Now, during the opening mission, Captain Titus makes a bold and arguably reckless decision to drop from a Thunderhawk mid-flight, crashing through the enemy fire to reach the surface. Even Sidonis, a seasoned veteran, questions this move. Leandros, who's still loyal but concerned, also raises objections, telling him that the Codex Astartes explicitly doesn't support this action. He's not trying to be difficult, he's genuinely concerned, and honestly, who wouldn't be? Captain Titus brushes him off and mockingly tells him to try to keep up. But Leandros isn't wrong here. Charging headlong into a war zone without a plan isn't strategic brilliance, it's a gamble, one that nearly gets them killed. Now, it's definitely a cool moment for us as the players, but lore-wise, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Even still, Leandros follows his captain into the fray. Now, it's not uncommon for Leandros both in and out of universe to frequently get characterized as being inflexible in his beliefs and unable to deviate from the Codex Astartes, which will come up a few times throughout this video. But shortly after this opening, we see something that immediately breaks this narrative, as it's Leandros, not Titus, who comes up with the idea to destroy the orc-controlled macro cannon by rigging a melta-charge to one of its shells. The plan is ultimately a success and the gun ends up getting destroyed. It's honestly a pretty impressive display of battlefield initiative for a Codex thumper. Even Sidonis praises him for it. Now, things escalate when the squad encounters Inquisitor Drogon and his mysterious power source, which turns out to channel warp energy. Titus is oddly trusting of the Inquisitor, despite constant secrecy, potential danger, and mounting red flags. Leandros, by contrast, grows increasingly alarmed and jumps to the conclusion that this device is linked to chaos. And as will become a pattern throughout this video, Titus and Sidonis once again brush him off. And that's because warp energy has been used by other Imperial devices in the past. But here's the thing, Leandros' gut instinct here is absolutely right, but I'm getting ahead of myself.
Yeah, so he's paid attention to a lot of the nitty-gritty details. Like, I try to do that when I play through Space Marines, but even then, like, once you play through the whole game, like, it's all of the knowledge you accumulates, because it's so action-heavy, kind of goes in one ear and out the other. So, to be fair, like, even I forget a lot of the finer points, like the fact that, oh, it was Leandros who came up with the Melta charge, planting on the giant shell for the cannon, like, type of solution. And then there was, like, and among other things. And, him being skeptical of the warp stone, yeah, I mean, like, who wouldn't be a little skeptical of that particular subject? Because it was kind of strange how this power source tends to behave weirdly. It's apparently a stone of some type. It's a catalyst, according to the Drogon. And nobody really questions it all that much. All of which Leandros is more inclined to do so, right? It does paint an interesting sort of light for Leandros to be as skeptical as he is, but I do find that he's still got a lot to go through before we can really pick apart and dissect whether or not this guy is deserving of his reputation. Personally, I think he doesn't deserve nearly the same level of hate or vitriol that he likely gets. Like, me personally. Like, I get why people hate him, but I feel like this could literally be anybody. Anybody else could have been in Leandros' shoes, and they would have done the same shit. Except for the part with the Inquisition. That part is still kind of inexcusable for me as well. But that's just how it is, right? Let's just move on.
A little bit after this, they locate the device and fight off a bunch of orcs. Titus grabs the thing in his own hands, which triggers a huge explosion of warp energy. But miraculously, he's totally fine. That's something that definitely shouldn't have happened, as Drogon later explains. One should not be able to touch the warp and walk away unscathed unless they themselves are part of chaos. But Titus seems to be the exception to this for some reason. Now, shortly after this, chaos finally shows its face, and we're introduced to the true villain behind what's happening here on Graia. You see, the Inquisitor was lying to them, and by using the device to power a weapon known as the Scourge, the only thing they really managed to accomplish is open a portal for demons to start flooding onto this world, as well as the Chaos Lord Nemeroth. Drogon is revealed to be nothing more than one of his corpse puppets, and after this, Nemeroth takes a particular interest in Titus. He finds him fascinating for his ability to resist the touch of the warp, just like himself. He praises him for helping his plans unfold. The implication here being that Titus, whether knowingly or not, has just worked to further the agenda of chaos. So at this point, Leandros is fearing the worst, and if we're fair here, who can really blame him? Titus is exhibiting resistance to warp corruption, which again is a massive red flag. He's been making all kinds of rash, impulsive decisions, at least from Leandros' perspective, as they all seem to go directly counter to the rules that he's been taught to hold sacred. Something that a Chaos double agent would do. And worst of all, Titus never takes the time to explain himself or have a real conversation about what's going on. Over and over, he dismisses Leandros' concerns and often just straight up mocks him. Leandros can't see inside of his mind. He doesn't know his captain's intentions. So from his perspective, there are three possibilities here. Either one, Titus is deceiving them and is in fact a Chaos double agent, or two, he's a double agent for Chaos that doesn't know he's a double agent for Chaos and is being manipulated by Chaos. Or three, he's completely innocent. But here's the thing about Warhammer 40K, and it conjures the age-old adage of the Inquisition. In the grimdark future, innocence proves nothing.
That's literally the motto for the Inquisition. And also, again, yeah, to be fair on this point, I do feel like Titus does shaft him a little too much in the game, but, I feel like that's kind of, I feel like at some, to some degree, right, when you have someone who's this annoyingly, skeptical of every little thing, you kind of just stop paying any mind or heed to his concerns, and you just start caring less, and you're just, at some point you're just like, just do the damn thing that I asked you to do, Leandros. Stop being such a little, such a little wet blanket about it. It's, at some points, you just stop caring to bother answering these incessant questions, assuaging these annoying levels of, scrutinizing and skeptical and just outright concerns, and you just move towards indifference. You're just like, I don't fucking care, Leandros. We're just doing the thing. If you don't like it, fuck off. It gets to a point, right? And I feel like that Leandros being where he is, I feel like his existence there, it probably, especially when you think about it like this, he is literally going down on a mission with his captain. I don't know about you, and I don't know much about how Space Marines chapters tend to squat up and tend to delegate their resources as well as their manpower, but I feel like a freshly new cadet like Leandros going down in a mission in a 3-man cell with the captain to essentially, eliminate some orcs seems like a pretty big fucking deal, if you ask me. Leandros, technically, he probably should not be in that position. It probably should be another Space Marine veteran going down with Titus in this particular instance. But clearly, there's something in Leandros outside of his skeptical nature that Titus recognizes, which is why he keeps him around, just in general. The other reason why Titus probably keeps Leandros around is also because maybe even though he does shaft him quite hard for doing this all the time, he probably has a bit more of a respect for people that do question these sorts of things, because he probably recognizes the value of having a difference of opinion. Here's the interesting thing about some leaders, especially the best ones. They will put people in positions of power who actively question the company, that actively question the organizations that they're a part of, and will absolutely pick apart, critique, and scrutinize every move, every action, and they will do it with no level of apology towards the fact, because they care more about the direction of the company and about the means we employ to do that than the fact that we're just doing it to begin with, And that's the kind of people you need to be, you need to have in places and positions of power so as to keep, a nice heaping helping of checks and balances, as well as just to remind you that, yeah, there are probably going to be ways that this is going to fuck up. And also, yes, even if they just do it just to be an asshole, you need to have the opinion of people who just don't fucking like you to understand how they're going to receive getting hit with certain information. You just need to have that. You need to have that fucking insight, and you need to know how to best navigate each and every situation if you're going to be heading any type of organization, whether it's a company, and especially in a fucking war zone. You need to understand your men first and foremost, above all else, before you just throw them to the wolves, so to speak. Right? But anyways, yeah, that's just my 2 cents on that. I think that Titus does give him a bit more of a shafting than he probably should, but I think he doesn't do that out of an intent to be a dick. I don't think he does that with an intent to just, have a proverbial punching bag. I think he does it because I think he has Leandros around simply because not only is he effective as a soldier, but I think he's also someone who clearly is, maybe to Titus, at least for a while, was someone who was more grounded and more realistic about how most people are going to view his actions and are going to question his authority, and among other things, right? He was basically there to be the voice of the chapter rather than of the second company, rather than just, you know, to be good at fighting and killing things, and also just to be annoying. But yeah.
One could live their entire life furthering the agenda of the Chaos Gods with every single action that they take, and never fully understand that this is happening. Chaos, by its very nature, is insidious and manipulative to the extreme. It may be true that Titus truly believes he isn't a heretic, but ultimately, that doesn't really matter, and Leandros understands this. But he's hesitating, he's not sure, he still needs a little bit more evidence, but the clock is ticking. His inaction could directly lead to a disaster of apocalyptic proportions. A little bit after this, he once again raises his concerns, pointing out that Titus has now held the device unshielded twice and survived, that the Codex warns those in league with Chaos can withstand the warp's touch. Sidonus tells him enough, this isn't the time or place to be having this conversation, and Titus, to his credit, does tell him that he doesn't take this warp resistance lightly, but agrees with Sidonus that now was not the time. The search for answers would have to wait until after they dealt with the current Chaos invasion, but Leandros warns them that it could be too late by then. Which, I'm gonna be real with you, going through this game again for this video, and watching all of these cutscenes again, I feel the same frustration with Leandros that I did a decade ago. However, I've learned a lot about this franchise in the last decade, and looking at these events here again, I don't think Leandros is wrong here. If Titus is unknowingly being manipulated here and guided into a set course of actions that will ultimately bring about a Chaos victory, not taking like a minute to talk about this seems kind of insane. Like, Leandros is the only one of them who's actually acting like an Ultramarine here. Now, admittedly, at the time this game came out, this was 5th edition Warhammer, which was the Matt Ward era of Warhammer. Now, we're not going to get into all of the controversy surrounding him and his contributions to the setting, but at this time, the Ultramarines had deviated way far away from what they were supposed to be, and they kind of became the Mary Sue chapter, where they would have rules and things that made them unique on Monday, but on Tuesday, in the name of doing something really super duper cool, all of that lore would just be thrown out the window. This scene in the game is a perfect moment for the iconic Ultramarines practice of throwing around practicals and theoreticals. But again, that doesn't happen. A little while after this, Sidonus ends up taking the warp device for safekeeping, but unfortunately ends up getting killed by Nemeroth, causing the power source to fall into the Chaos Lord's hands. To his credit, Leandros only shows up after Nemeroth has vanished and Titus is leaning over Sidonus' corpse. Now, you would think that this would play into his suspicions that Titus is a heretic, but to his credit, that doesn't really seem to be the case. He doesn't blame Titus for his...
Yeah, that's the most interesting thing, is that he really doesn't blame Titus for this moment. I thought that part really stuck out to me. It's like, I feel like if he was a piece of shit, he would absolutely be blaming Titus for his inability to make the correct decision, and it's his decisions, it's his authority that led to the demise of Sidonis. But that's not what he did. He actually did feel bad for Sidonis. He actually felt bad that this is what had to happen. This had well not had to happen, but this is what happened to Sidonis and all the things that led to this, right? You know, like it is definitely a little surprising that Leandros is not nearly as a cut and dry, just like hater gonna hate type of character like people like kind of drum him up to be. Like he's like again, he's whiny. He's a bit insistent on certain like on the Codex Astartes and among other things, and also just questioning like the authority of the people around him. But it's like yeah, I feel like I made all of those points earlier. Like I feel like his existence there is out of necessity rather than just to be annoying. But yeah,
his brother's death. But there is something that he is suspicious about. Titus's statement that they should split up, that he will face the Chaos Lord alone, when he is most vulnerable and attempting to ascend into a demon prince. Leandros tells him point blank that that's either suicide or worse, exactly what the Chaos Lord wants. Titus, understanding the implication of Leandros' questions, asks him if he thinks he's falling to chaos, and Leandros tells him that he doesn't. But we can see in his expression that he's not entirely convinced of those words. How can he be? Titus is a great man for sure, but far greater men than him, even the Primarchs, have been corrupted by chaos. As always, Titus doesn't bother to reassure him or have a meaningful discussion. He just brushes him off again with more cryptic bravado.
again, to Titus's own credit as well, they're in the middle of a very high stakes situation. All right, he literally dropped down with only 3 men to combat orcs. And on top of that, he was going to. I'm assuming his strategy was going to rely heavily on the Cadian regiment to do most of the legwork. And he was going to be out there doing most of the murdering and the slaughtering, and providing assistance where it's needed. He probably didn't want to bring down the entire chapter to fight orcs because he probably wanted to sacrifice as little lives as humanly possible. And that could be the reason for why he chose to go down there himself, as well as bringing 2 other people with him to achieve this effect. He probably also had a different plan in mind when he was going to deal with the orcs. And so when everything just kind of went out of control in the way that it had, he had to adjust his strategies, and he had to make concessions where it was needed. And when it came to Leandros' concerns, of course, that's going to be put on the back burner when everything keeps devolving into something larger and greater than what they first perceived or even imagined. Right? I feel like Titus has like a very legitimate reason for not wanting to just stop and hash this out with Leandros for a quick second, because time is of the essence, and any second wasted could mean the death of thousands, if not millions, and as well as an entire Forge world, for fuck's sake. But yeah, that's what I think about it.
After this, we move into the end of the game, and the big showdown between Titus and Nemeroth. This is where Nemeroth himself confirms that Titus is intrinsically linked to the warp. Whether intentionally or not, everything he's been doing up until this point has been furthering his agenda. It's ironic, as they're both on polar opposite ends of the spectrum, but this Demon Prince and Leandros have come to the same conclusion about Titus. In the final moments of the game, we're shown an inquisitorial gunship touching down, and out steps an Inquisitor and a retinue of Black Templars, who ask Leandros if he's sure of his accusation, to which Leandros tells them that he is. Titus is a traitor and a heretic. Now, of course, Titus denies this because from his perspective, he's a goddamn hero. He's as loyal as they come. He just banished a demon prince back to oblivion. But the Inquisitor asks him if it's possible that he had unholy assistants, to which Titus doesn't really have an answer. In order to prevent a full-blown investigation into the Ultramarines and all of the guardsmen and women on Graia, Titus agrees to go with them willingly and submit to the Inquisition's will.
Because we all know how well that turned out for the fucking Space Wolves and what happened on that one planet that they assisted. And then the Inquisition, or a particular Inquisitor, so to speak, right, was just like, hmm, hmm. They fought demons. Chaos corruption? Perhaps? Might as well not leave it to chance. Let's castrate this entire population, and we'll put them through, and we'll basically put them through internment camps, among other things. We'll make them just slaves until their dying days, right? That was the decision of a very particular Inquisitor, and the Space Wolves saw that decision. They looked at these people in the face with the Grey Knights and all, and they were just like, how about fucking no? Fucking quite literally, the Space Wolves literally fought to and fro to defend this planet, worked with these Cadians in order to secure it, and they respected the hustle and the effort of these Cadians so goddamn much that they were just like, no, we're not fucking doing that. You can take that bullshit you just spewed and just shove it right back up your fucking ass. We're not doing that shit. Just fuck off. And so, naturally, right, like when they were going to make the decision to just do it anyways, the Space Wolves were understandably a little miffed. What did they do? They just packed everybody's bags and they moved them off world to a different world. And then when the Inquisitor heard about this, he got so fucking petty, okay? He followed them from system to system, planet to planet, and every planet that they found, he blew it up to ensure that they could not rest, or they could not find a place for which to just a place to which to just like drop off these people, because every place they went, he would just blow it up. He would just blow it up outright. He just exterminated planet after planet because he was just that fucking petty. That fucking petty. That's where the fucking meme came from of like the Inquisition. They love to exterminate everything. That's where the meme comes from, because this motherfucker was just like, I'm going to hound these people until they freaking capitulate, because I am an Inquisitor. How dare you? How dare you refuse my authority? He basically was just being a baby bitch loser about the whole thing. And the Grey Knights were also understandably getting really annoyed by the situation, because they just wanted the situation to be done and over with, and they literally lost their chapter master over this. Fucking Space Wolves got on board, and then as soon as they teleported on board for a quote-unquote, little, what was it, like a talks? A bit of a peace talks? They didn't really so much as bring peace as they did bring a heaping helping of violence, and their chapter master was just utterly brutalized by the chapter master of the Space Wolves. Literally point blank, I believe it was Melta or some type of bolter rifle to the dome, and it was just the funniest fucking thing, just how ridiculous this whole situation got. They had to awake their dead chapter master. Like, I cannot stress this enough. The Space Wolves had to reawaken their practically half-dead chapter master in a dreadnought to go and essentially wrestle the situation, to basically engage in some type of in some type of talks, or just essentially help to navigate the situation, because it was getting that fucking petty. It was ridiculous. That whole situation was just fucking embarrassing. It makes the Inquisition look like a bunch of fucking pansies. But yeah. Sorry. I went on a bit of a tangent there, but you can see how pedantic this shit is, especially with the Inquisition. Like, if they have a reason to want to bully the shit out of you and be petty little fuckers, they can, and there's nothing that you can do technically to stop them. It's crazy.
In his parting words to Leandros, he tells him that he has failed at being an Ultramarine. And that's where their storyline came to a close until the second game released over 10 years later. Now, Leandros would be present throughout the events of the second game as well, but that's not something that's revealed to us until the very end of the story. As it turns out, he was seemingly rewarded for his betrayal of Captain Titus, as he's now become a chaplain, something that caught a lot of fans off guard, and to many, didn't really make any kind of sense. Why was this guy rewarded for snitching? But Wes, I hear a few of you asking, why would they make someone a chaplain who clearly does not respect the chaplain's authority? Didn't he go against the chain of command when he made his report to the Inquisition instead of the Reclusium? Doesn't it explicitly state
I mean, that's my biggest claim against Leandros by far.
in the Codex Astartes that issues of suspected corruption are supposed to be handled in-house? Doesn't that make him a hypocrite? If he's preaching the virtue of the Codex one minute, only to go against its tenets the next, and also conveniently condemning Titus of the same behavior? No, it doesn't, and no, he didn't. Next question. All right, wait a minute, hold up. Actually, that one does deserve a little bit more of an explanation, as I'll fully admit it's not something I realized myself until I did a whole bunch of research first. Many Warhammer 40K fans believe that suspected corruption cases are almost always handled in-house by a chapter's chaplains, that the Codex Astartes states the Inquisition should not be called upon unless absolutely necessary, and then the only ones who have the authority to make that call are the chaplains or the chapter master himself. This is why many Warhammer fans call Leandros a hypocrite. He spends the game preaching adherence to the Codex and condemning Titus for breaking from its teachings, yet when push comes to shove, he goes against the code he claims to hold in such high regard by ignoring the chain of command and bringing his accusation right to the top. At face value, this take makes a lot of sense, and it's why I believe it's such a common argument against Leandros. I'll admit it's one that I believe myself for quite some time. However, in doing research for this video, I could not find a single source that explicitly states this to be so. What I believe has happened here is that two parallel pieces of lore that are not inherently linked together have been combined in the minds of fans in order to justify their hatred of Leandros, which, in fairness to them, they don't really need to justify why they hate Leandros. It's totally okay to hate this character. But when they invoke the lore to validate their feelings, now we gotta talk about it. First off, it's true that one of the roles of a chaplain is to monitor their brothers for weakness of spirit, faith, and will. The vast majority of the time, corruption cases will in fact be handled by them, and in some cases, also the librarians. Now second, it's also true that Space Marine chapters do not always see eye to eye with the Inquisition, and would be wary of courting an investigation by them. If it's done in-house, they can quietly deal with it themselves. If the Inquisition gets involved, the consequences could be dire. In extreme cases, the entire chapter may be condemned as heretics for the actions of one individual. However, this does not mean there's always an antagonistic relationship between these two organizations. Opinions will differ from chapter to chapter and individual to individual, but for the most part, the Inquisition is held in high esteem, especially by the Ultramarines, who again are the most compliant by-the-book founding chapter. Chaplains also are not nearly as specialized as an inquisitor when it comes to rooting out heresy. That's only part of a chaplain's job, whereas for an inquisitor, one with the authority of the emperor himself and unlimited resources at his disposal, who spent their entire life studying exactly this, an investigation handled by them is going to almost always be much more thorough. Okay, so maybe it makes sense for some Space Marines sometimes to reach out directly to the Inquisition, but it still doesn't make sense for Leandros, right? He's obsessed with following the rules of the Codex Astartes, and doesn't that book specifically say to never get the Inquisition involved? Now, I've seen this take floating around a lot on the internet, and I'll be honest, I don't exactly know where it comes from, considering that the Codex is mostly centered around tactics, chapter organization, and how a Space Marine should conduct themselves. Unfortunately, we do not have a physical copy of the Codex to read for ourselves, so we'll never be 100% sure of what is and is not contained within its pages outside of direct quotes from characters in the books or games. But we can make a pretty educated guess that it contains zero information pertaining to the Inquisition. Remember, Rabute Gilliman wrote the Codex in the 21st year of the 31st millennium, right after the Horus Heresy had concluded. He would then be wounded by his brother Fulgrim at the Battle of Thalza 1 century later and placed in stasis. Now, the Inquisition's timeline, on the other hand, is
It's way into the future. It's a. I don't know about the Codex Astartes looking into this. I feel like that it's more so about like what is the it's more so a question of like who is supposed to be the like the representative of these types of concerns. Who do you go to ask and have these questions be answered? And it's more so a question of like how far is the compromise technically, right? Because from again, if we're looking at this from Leandra's perspective, the idea that you would go straight to an inquisitor for this, it probably means that he either doesn't trust the chapter to do it thoroughly, like themselves, or at least the second company's chaplains, among other things. And while the chaplain apparently is just one of their tasks is just to do that, I feel like without at least asking around about like who should like without further like asking about like what should be done in this particular instance where you have suspicions of a specific ultramarine and you're not sure who to go to with these types of concerns, you think that the first thing that someone would do is just say go to someone that's already here, go to like from someone from the usual channels, like just go talk to somebody who's actually here, can actually deal with the situation personally, and without getting any of the bureaucracy wrapped around and get all the red tape involved, right? I feel like that is a logical conclusion that most people would arrive to. And I feel like that when it comes to the Inquisition being called in for this, I feel like the only reason why you would need to call an Inquisitor is because you genuinely have a belief that the entire Second Company, from Leandros' perspective, could potentially be compromised as a result of Titus's corruption. And even then, that's a big stretch because despite the fact that yeah, maybe the second company is kind of led more so like a straight arrow type of a ship where nobody really questions everything and it's all about doing things, like no matter what the cost, just getting shit done, like as Titus tends to do things. I feel like that in that particular regard, if the entire second company kind of reflects this kind of sort of like play it by ear attitude, it makes sense to some degree for Leandros to maybe want to go straight to the Inquisition because they probably, like the entire second company shares a similar mindset as Titus, and they probably also, they kind of like sympathize, if not just downright relate to the guy, which is probably why he is the captain. And so to outright question like the highest authority of your company to for suspicions of heresy, like a lot of people will probably be a little bit more skeptical with that assertion and that take than actually take it that seriously. I'm sure even if he did get a chaplain involved to actually look into this, the chaplain might not actually think he's actually what Leandro says that he is, and he might just brush it off as like again how everybody else in the game has done it. Like if Titus and Sidonis's behavior towards Leandros is any indication, not very many people pay Leandros's concerns them with that much credibility. And so it makes sense that if he can't rely on anyone else to do, like to look into it, he's going to rely on the next best possible like scenario, right? Which is to go straight to the Inquisition to potentially look into this and handle it personally, right? I feel like these are conclusions that anyone could draw from and maybe make sense. But while I think that does certainly help to kind of like you know, sort of like assuage that sort of like, maybe even kind of eliminate the issue, I feel like this is all just his speculation. This is all just theory crafting. And I feel like that until we get a genuine answer as to why Leandros did the things that he did, we're not really going to get around this particular, like issue. And going through the lore to try to figure out how and why Leandros would think this would be the correct course of action is it's really up to the interpretation of the readers as well as the audiences who played the game, because like it's very much a mixed bag, because again, Leandros did everything technically correct, technically, And while the Codex Astartes was definitely would probably not have anything in regards to how you would go about like outing a brother for suspected heresy, especially when it comes to ecclesiarchy and inquisitor and other types of like third party related things. Like I feel like that Leandros made the best out of the situation he was dealt. And if we're being kind of honest, I feel like that kind of on the fly decision making about trying to do making the best possible decision in the worst type of circumstances is again, no different than how Titus plays to his own strengths. You know, we could certainly argue that as well. I think Leandros probably has learned a little bit from Titus in his time working with the guy. So I feel like he's just exercising his own ideas and his own sort of like notions on what might be the correct decision given the circumstances. But, again, we're just spitballing here.
Unsurprisingly, mysterious and shrouded in secrecy, just like most things in 40K. We know that it has its roots in the heresy, but we also know that it wouldn't be considered a formal branch of imperial power for several millennia after Guilliman's wounding. By the time of the War of the Beast, halfway through the 32nd millennium, the Inquisition was depicted as a single order operating off of a single planet, and nobody knew about them, a far cry from what they would eventually become. Now, as Guilliman would not have known about the Inquisition until his resurrection, he also probably wouldn't have written anything about them until after he woke back up, which was long after the events of Space Marine 1. The big takeaway here is that although we would expect something like Leandros' accusation of heresy against Titus to always be handled in-house, that's not always the case, and the Inquisition getting involved really isn't that weird. This is one of those things that's more backed up by vibes than concrete information in the lore, and it's something that's been inferred by fans and repeated ad nauseum to the point where it's been taken as fact. For the sake of the argument though, let's say that even if it's technically allowed, going to the Inquisition instead of the chaplains is at bare minimum seen as a big taboo, right? It's fair to assume that even if he didn't technically break any rules, he still messed up in that regard. Here's the thing, I don't think so. But that's because I don't think Leandros actually contacted the Inquisition at all. Bear with me on this. Throughout the events of the first game, we never see a chaplain that Leandros could have reported to. This has led some of Leandros' defenders to argue that the Inquisition was the only available institution to make the report to. And that does make some sense, but I take a few issues with this. Just because we never see a chaplain on the ground doesn't mean that they aren't there. Whether they're fighting planetside in a different location, or more likely are stationed in orbit on a strike cruiser. The Vox systems that Leandros, Titus, and Sidonis would have access to would be able to contact one of these chaplains no problem. But you know who they wouldn't be able to contact? The Inquisition. But wait, Wes, I hear you saying, wasn't the Inquisition already on Graia? That's true, Inquisitor Drogon was here, but there's two issues with that. Number one, it said that he had been dead for many years. They had just met his flesh puppet. Number two, just because one Inquisitor's here doesn't mean there's a larger group of them somewhere else. Inquisitors tend to act alone or in their own small cabals. Number three, now assuming Leandros did have that information, he had a way of contacting the Inquisition. His Vox system wouldn't be strong enough to get a message off-world. It would require a trained astropath. And there was literally no opportunity at any point in the game where he could have slipped away, found one, and gotten that message out. Remember in Space Marine 2, just getting to the astropath in that one to send a message to Calgar was like a multi-mission ordeal. And what they were dealing with on Graia, admittedly it was orcs and demons versus Tyranids and Zangors, but it was kind of the same situation.
To be fair on that point, yeah, to kind of actually, maybe to nitpick this a little bit more, actually. When he was given the opportunity, right? When Leandros was given the opportunity to make a call to, like, the fleet to essentially make a sort of, like, to basically relay Titus's orders, that was probably the premier moment where he could have made a call to the Inquisition. But granted, I will give him leniency on this one. I feel like that, yes, system, dealing with an inquisition that might be several systems light years away might be a bit difficult to get a message out there. I feel like that I feel like that's depending on how powerful the relay system they use to make that Vox communication, or like it really depends on the context of that scenario, because I'm trying to remember exactly like the terminal that was used, and I don't remember all the specifics. But I believe the Vox terminal was needed in order to make a call to the fleet. So that doesn't necessarily mean that it's strong enough to make a galaxy, like galaxy-wide calls or messages. It just, what it really means is that it's only capable of relaying messages across world. And so it makes sense that maybe instead of calling the Inquisition using that terminal, he maybe called someone within the second company to basically make the call or make that decision to get the Inquisition involved. But then again, even if we were to draw this out to a third party that, like made that particular call to get another third party, this is starting to sound ridiculous, to basically come and investigate the situation on Graia and Captain Titus's potential warp resistance and potential heresy, as well as his corruption. It paints a very more elaborate picture as to how this all came about. Like Inquisitor, like the Inquisition showing up to basically arrest Titus is kind of it is certainly a weird sort of issue, because it's like, how did anyone make this call? Did they just happen to be flying by? Like, what's going on here, right? Like, there is a level of like specifics and and discernment that needs to be made, because yeah, most communications, especially across multiple systems, and I've seen from Rogue Trader and among other places, like you need telepaths to make those type of messages, and they don't really last for like during those encounters. And if and sometimes like even when they some messages, depending on how far they are, like it takes a lot of effort, but like you just don't do that stuff just like with for no reason or nonsensically, right? So there have to have been people on Leandros' side who saw legitimate reasons and concerns for this particular thing, and maybe depending on how Leandros worded it, like they probably thought, oh my god, Titus has been corrupted by warp energies. We better do something about this. We better get the Inquisition involved. Let's contact Holy Terra about this. I can see multiple angles of how this actually came about, but yeah, I would definitely think that in order for this to make a bit of sense, I feel like there would have to be telepaths involved. There have to be scryers, telepaths, and people who actually sympathize with Leandros' concerns to be willing to make that decision on top of other things, right? And it also would require, right, the Inquisition to at least be an Inquisitor to at least be close enough to really make that sort of like that sort of tread across space and time through the warp, just to even make the effort to want to arrest Titus. And I feel like there's a lot of variables to this whole thing that seem like it could easily go wrong or be a little too inconsistent, but I don't know. See, this is kind of the problem when it comes to delving into the specifics of certain details at Quantaries when it comes to certain story elements, because it kind of makes telling a story kind of difficult. But granted, like, this is a game about just wanting to kill things and just just killing things and doing shit. It's not necessarily supposed to be like taken as seriously as it has been in this video and with my reaction. It's just meant to be just a fun romp through a game, making you feel like a space marine for like a few hours or so. That's all it's really meant to do. It's not meant to be this hyper focused and critically analyzed. It's just a story for the sake of a story, in my opinion.
Given all of this, I truly believe that Leandros didn't actually break the chain of command here. He didn't violate the Codex Astartes in that way. He did what he was supposed to. He contacted the Reclusium, who determined that the Inquisition needed to be involved. The chaplains made the report on his behalf, then informed Leandros that an Inquisitor was en route. The Inquisitor we meet at the end would have already been briefed on the situation. He knew who Leandros was, and when he asks if he's sure of his accusation, it's not because they've already spoken, it's because the relevant information had already been relayed to him by the chaplaincy. This is one of those things that's not really spelled out for us in game, so I'll admit I can't prove this one, but just based on the lore, it's the only thing that actually makes sense here.
I agree. I agree. And because of the vagueness and the nebulous nature of this whole thing, it makes kind of like any type of reasoning to really pick apart this argument that much more annoyingly complicated, unnecessarily so. Again, while I do agree with the fact that getting the Inquisition involved in the first place does definitely seem like kind of an annoying thing to do, I will relent on one aspect of it, and that's the sense that, you know, like there are some definite there's some definite elements here that might be worth noting when it comes to his decision to get the Inquisition involved in the first place, or to have someone else potentially do it for him, or, you know, like to kind of make that decision on his behalf, you know, like to kind of take his concerns, kind of evaluate it, and then make that sort of like next step logical leap in decision making of just like, yeah, let's get the Inquisition involved, right? You know, like I feel like that there are definitely some elements here that make it difficult to really pin all of this on Leandros, but I feel like that regardless of how it's stated or how it's interpreted, Leandros still made the decision to undermine his commander, his chain, you know, like the chain of command to some degree, and just be like, "Hey, I have concerns, and I think our captain might be exposed to warp energies, and I think maybe because he hasn't been that negatively affected by them, he must be a traitor, or at least is secretly, without even realizing it himself, might be under the influence of the corrupting influence of the warp itself, right? And, you know, in this particular type of setting, you have to take claims like this very fucking seriously. And especially when it comes in, especially when it's about, like, the captain of an entire company, that kind of, you know, that kind of would be a big deal. Just, you know, just to put the record out there, that would be kind of a big deal. And I would imagine, right, that if we were to go with the assumption that this is actually, in fact, the case, that Leandros did just get the, you know, did contact the second company's, you know, flagship, and they basically, he Vox communicated his concerns to the people on board, whether it was a chaplain or not, they clearly gave it some level of weight and value to really warrant getting the Inquisition on board on some level, right? And so they made that decision, and so that tells me one or two things. That it tells me that they are not uh nearly as bad as Titus is when it comes to, you know, flying by the seat of your own pants level of thinking, and they probably do put a lot of concern and effort into their actual decisions as well as their military strategies and planning. And so when it comes to this particular scenario, they probably weighted the costs and the ramifications of this particular matter very highly, very heavily. And because Leandros is the one who's making it, they probably thought it was a concern, right? You have to imagine, right, that this is Leandros we're talking about. If Leandros has made the concern and they're like, maybe we should get the Inquisition involved, they clearly value Leandros' opinion at least well enough to maybe want to warrant actually leaping to the next logical decision of getting the Inquisition involved to investigate the matter thoroughly. That tells you a couple of things. One of those things being that Leandros has been right in the past, at least about a great many other things, or his gut sort of like experiences on, like what he feels about may or may not be the right course of action in a given situation is actually something that's worth heeding or even worth warranting, because, like, he has a track record that clearly states that, yeah, his gut feelings usually pull through more often than not. Why would we question this now when it's been clear that his gut, his gut feelings or his suspicions have always proven to be correct? right? I feel like there's a whole level of possibility and underlining sort of like unspoken details here that we could easily delve into and really nitpick at, that it would just completely make this an annoying thing to talk about, because it would be something we could do ad nauseum. But yeah, without getting too, tangential on this, I feel like that the like there's definitely a lot of shit to unpack here when it comes to this particular point. Young and
Now, I'll admit
inexperienced.
this next one's a little bit of a side tangent, but it's a common criticism I see get leveled against Leandros pretty often, and that's that he's young and inexperienced in Space Marine 1. Many fans claim that the reason he's so rigidly attached to the Codex Astartes is that he hasn't lived long enough to develop the kind of battlefield pragmatism that Titus embodies. But there are a few problems with this argument. First and foremost, Leandros is not some fresh-faced neophyte. He's a full-fledged battle brother serving in the command squad of the Ultramarine 2nd Company.
That's what I'm saying.
That's massive. This position implies not only a significant amount of combat experience, but also a level of tactical aptitude and reliability far beyond the average line Marine. Now, it is true that Leandros is the youngest member of the squad. Both Titus and Sidonis visibly wear 2 service studs in their forehead, indicating over 2 centuries of service, whereas Leandros doesn't have any studs, suggesting that he's served for less than 100 years. But even within that time frame, he's likely been in active, constant service for anywhere from 40 to 99 years. That's not a rookie, that's a battle-hardened Space Marine who has likely fought through multiple campaigns across multiple war zones. To reach this point, Leandros would have had to complete not only his initial transformation from neophyte to full Astartes, but also rotate through multiple companies. By the time a Marine reaches the 2nd Company, he's already survived decades of combat, proven his worth, and demonstrated command-level potential. The idea that he's some inexperienced kid who just doesn't know better, that doesn't hold up to scrutiny. What we're really seeing here isn't a lack of experience, it's a difference in perspective. Leandros isn't inexperienced, he's devout. He isn't inflexible because he's green, he's inflexible because he truly believes that the Codex is the Primarch's will made manifest. And why wouldn't he believe that? This is what he has explicitly been taught. Remember, if he's in the 2nd Company, then that means he's served in the 6th, and one of the core things Ultramarines learn in the 6th Company is how to think for themselves. This is the point in their journey where they're actively told to push back against the Codex, to question its teachings and identify areas in which it can be improved. But some people misunderstand what this lesson is supposed to be about. The idea is that for as great as Guilliman and the Codex are, it's impossible for them to have the answers to everything this galaxy could possibly throw at you. If you adhere to its teachings, the Codex will give you answers for 999,999 engagements out of 1,000,000, but the one in which it doesn't, the one in which you're fighting an enemy that Guilliman had never encountered or a situation he could never have anticipated, that's the one where you need to be able to think outside of the box in order to complete your mission and make sure you and your brothers come home safely. This lesson is not a free pass to throw on a jump pack and jump out of a Thunderhawk in an active war zone because you think it's cool, needlessly endangering your brothers and the mission just because it makes for an awesome video game intro. And make no mistake, it was in fact a badass intro to a video game.
I don't think I need to
remember
make
a few
any
months
points on
after
that.
Space Marine 2 came out, seeing this hot take floating around on the internet, that Leandros being made a chaplain in the 2nd game was secretly a punishment for what he did in the 1st, that the higher-ups saw him as unfit not just for the 2nd Company command squad, but even as a regular battle line Astartes, that by making him a chaplain, they were giving him the Space Marine equivalent of a desk job. Now, the first time I saw this, I thought it was just kind of dumb and I moved on with my life. But then I started seeing it pop up a lot more, especially in my own comment section anytime I mentioned Leandros in a video. A couple of people even went off on me in my top 10 most hated characters video when I described Leandros as being frustrated because it felt like he got rewarded for betraying Titus and by proxy us. They told me I was an idiot, that I didn't know what I was talking about because I clearly didn't understand that it wasn't an honor at all.
it's nice to see that even hardcore fans who actually bother to make lore videos get the same level of get the same level of critical scrutiny by the fan base. It's kind of funny. I don't. I want to preface. I have not gotten any sort of hate as a result of me covering 40K content or fantasy Warhammer, but for that matter, except for maybe that one Pancreas video that I did about him talking about the differences between 40K and fantasy. But that criticism was genuinely warranted because I was a goofy bitch that particular day in video. But anyways, yeah, without getting too without digressing too hard. um, yeah, I feel like a lot of fans, especially like with many different interpretations and ideas about what the franchise is and what it's about and how all the interconnected things typically tend to work and kind of congeal into itself. I feel like that there's definitely going to be a lot of different unique sort of looks and interpretations to how established lore is handled. And so you're going to find people who disagree, and you're going to find people who will, tend to nitpick and criticize your takes on anything, just in any given fandom, right? But I feel like 40K in particular kind of is a bit more critical and more scrutinizing. And I feel like this is kind of apt. This is kind of appropriate, especially nowadays. Like before, it was kind of just like, oh, it's just nerds being, nerdy, and they're just being kind of annoying about it, right? Like I feel, like that's how like maybe 10 years ago you would pass this kind of stuff off. But I feel like nowadays more than ever before, that kind of level of scrutiny is almost needed because 40K has yet to go through its defining fall sort of moment, kind of, so to speak, right? Like we have a female custody, and then we have, and so there was an implication that there are more female custodies, and I'm not going to unpack that one because I don't truly understand the real ramifications of what that would imply outside of just the fact that it's just unnecessary, according to many people. But I feel like that, like, I do agree. We have the Adeptus Sororitas. They're already pretty badass as is, and they're pretty badass of a faction as well. The Custodies also have their own counter, which is the Sister of Silence. They really don't need to have female Custodies other than just to add a checkbox. And I feel like that is an understandable sort of argument to make because, the lore is already complicated enough. Why retcon or make concessions in certain details of the lore when there isn't really a need to do so, right? It would be as ridiculous as saying that there's an entire Space Marine chapter that, technically, like, well, not technically, but there's an entire Space Marine chapter completely comprised of women. It's just that, it would just add that much more layer of ridiculousness to it. It's just like, the percentage rate as established in the lore, right, is that boys typically tend to survive the process of becoming a Space Marine, and women simply just do not. They more often than not die through the process. Same thing with Witchers, right? And you already see the Witcher franchise making concessions towards this particular leniency, right? And I feel like that if Games Workshop did the same thing, we would have to deal with another issue of potential pedantic sort of argumentation of like, oh, it's just them bending the knee to potentially add more checks and balances and get more potentially like diversity bonuses and hires for the position of just, again, filling checkboxes. It's just, and as well as just making their financials look good, making themselves look good. It's all PR related, and it also helps to get a nice little bonus in their income, right? That's how most people view this shit. And so to do this, you're not really doing yourself or anyone any favors, and this is why most people tend to hate this shit. I have yet to see that level of pandering come from Games Workshop, but you better believe if they did something as obtuse and upfront as making an entire Space Marine chapter comprised of women, it would absolutely get lambasted and shatted on to the end of time. And I would be tired, and here the funniest thing, I would entirely agree with that. Because it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense lore-wise. It's kind of in your face, and it's a little obtuse. It just contradicts too much for the purposes of just having women in battle armor when there's already women in battle armor. called the fucking Adeptus Sororitas. It's unnecessary. You did not need to do this. Why the fuck is this a thing? And especially if their lore and their reason for existing and what they're about is equally just as pandering and pedantic, you're not going to get any favors. You are not going to win anyone any favors. In fact, I'm pretty sure if you did something like that, it's just the amount of vitriol that would come your way and would be injected into this fan base would probably piss off even the women who also love this franchise. The probably, I don't know how many women actually like 40K like content, but there are some women in this space who actually do cover 40K content, who talk about it. There's a Tempest among other places, but like there are people who genuinely like the setting who are not dudes, and so I feel like you're kind of putting unnecessary flack on them when you just outright contravene women into a chapter for no other reason than just to have brownie points. And you're kind of making them look like they're here for pretty much doing the same exact shit, right? And it puts an unnecessary lens of stress and scrutinization, as well as just vitriol, into the space. And I think that you would just be doing yourself a massive disservice if you, as well as just giving yourself a reputational black eye and making everybody else feel like they have to be on ease every time you do another announcement or another project or do anything new, because then they're going to have to question, oh god, I wonder what stupid shit they're going to inject into it this time. I can't wait to see how Games Workshop fucks it up even harder, kind of like how people look at Star Wars nowadays and how Disney fucks up everything, and how the new LucasArts or the Lucasfilm studio tends to fuck up everything these days. It's the same shit. You don't want to go down that route. You do not want to go down the Disney Star Wars route. I'm just telling you, Games Workshop, all right? I'm saying this as a warning. Do not go down the Disney Star Wars route. You're going to fucking fail. And you're going to be kicking yourself by doing so. Anyways, I'm done. I ranted too long, too hard. I'm going to shut up now.
Him being a chaplain was definitely secretly a punishment. Now, if you know me, you know I'm a big proponent of people coming up with their own theories about why things happen the way they do in 40K. The lore is pretty vague and cryptic sometimes, and that's part of the fun. I'm all for headcanon and interpretation, but I'm not gonna lie, that guy got under my skin a little bit. And I'm not immune to being petty, so...
I'll even rewind a little bit for good old Wes here.
Even as a regular battle line Astartes, that by making him a chaplain, they were giving him the Space Marine equivalent of a desk job. Now, the first time I saw this, I thought it was just kind of dumb, and I moved on with my life. But then I started seeing it pop up a lot more, especially in my own comment section anytime I mentioned Leandros in a video. A couple of people even went off on me in my top 10 most hated characters video when I described Leandros as being frustrated because it felt like he got rewarded for betraying Titus and, by proxy, us. They told me I was an idiot, that I didn't know what I was talking about because I clearly didn't understand that it wasn't an honor at all. Him being a chaplain was definitely secretly a punishment. Now, if you know me, you know I'm a big proponent of people coming up with their own theories about why things happen the way they do in 40K. The lore is pretty vague and cryptic sometimes, and that's part of the fun. I'm all for headcanon and interpretation, but I'm not gonna lie, that guy got under my skin a little bit. And I'm not immune to being petty, so allow me to rant about this for a minute. The only way I think someone could hear that take and actually believe it is if they don't understand what a chaplain is, what their role in the chapter entails, and how they're viewed by their battle brothers. A chaplain is the team MVP. They are among the most honored and revered Space Marines in the entire chapter. Their bravery is unmatched, their conviction absolute. On the battlefield, they're always on the front lines, where morale is crumbling, where the fighting is thickest, where their presence matters the most. Off the battlefield, they guide their brothers throughout their entire lives, from their induction as neophytes through every company rotation, all the way until the day they die. There may be no one besides the chapter master himself who has more influence over the future of a chapter than the chaplains do, as it is they who pass on their interpretation of the Codex, who shape the beliefs, mindsets, and ideals of future generations of Ultramarines. So we can throw the whole desk job idea out the window. But more importantly, being selected for chaplaincy is not a punishment at all, it's an extreme honor. In what universe would a Space Marine chapter, or any military institution for that matter, take someone they don't trust, someone who doesn't follow the rules, disrespects the chain of command, and has no ability to think for themselves, and say, you know who should be responsible for shaping the minds of every future recruit? That guy. Make it make sense. That take is absolutely insane. Leandro
I love that everyone's using the term make it make sense. I feel like I haven't heard anyone else use the term except myself, and maybe I'm not saying I'm the one who started it. I'm just saying it's funny that I'm not the only one who's been saying that, and I have not heard anyone else say it before prior to my reactions on certain videos covering certain topics. It's kind of funny. I've only said it like a couple of times. I think mostly in a shoe on head video, but it's just so funny. I've been seeing that so often now. It's kind of hilarious.
Andros wasn't made a chaplain as punishment.
I'm sorry, I'm done. I'm done.
Because from the in-universe perspective, from the Ultramarines' perspective,
I had to say it.
He did nothing wrong. Because when it came down to it, he was right to report Titus. He became a chaplain because he was qualified to be one. Everything about Leandros' character aligns with what's required to become a chaplain. He has an unwavering faith in the Emperor. He holds the Codex Astartes as sacred doctrine. He has the courage to make hard, unpopular decisions in the name of duty, even when it means standing alone. He shows discipline, conviction, and an unshakable moral compass. And most importantly, not a shred of mercy. Exactly the kind of qualities a reclusiarch looks for when choosing someone to carry the spiritual legacy of the chapter going forward. For all of his flaws, of which there are many, Leandros embodies all of that to a fault. If anything, becoming a chaplain wasn't just a logical next step for him, it was inevitable. Whew, okay, got a little heated on that one, I'll admit that. I don't go on rants very often, so enjoy that one for what it was, and I'm just gonna go ahead and move on to the next thing
Wes, if you ever see this video, God help your soul.
have written here in the script.
Get in line, my brother.
Before I move into my closing thoughts on this one, I want to throw one last Hail Mary in an attempt to defend Leandros, as it adds a lot of context to the first game when you understand the direction the storyline was originally supposed to go. This bit of information was revealed to us in an interview posted on The Escapist back in 2013. The former director of Space Marine 1, Raphael Van Leeuwenhoek, explains that the game was originally planned as a trilogy, and he had a whole story in place for Titus that would have taken a pretty interesting turn. I had some big plans for Titus. Sadly, THQ was already starting to fall apart by then, and it became clear that Space Marine 2 wasn't going to happen. I was pretty heartbroken about that. The second part of the story was to focus on a Titus Unleashed plot. Basically, there were forces arrayed against him that would see his loyalty to the Adeptus Astartes pushed to its limit, and his reaction would be to kind of go rogue. He would survive and come back even stronger in the third game, where other Space Marines still loyal to him would rally around him and he'd return to, quote, clean house, but as the head of a brand new chapter that we would build around him.
That is so funny that I said something exactly the same when I was talking about the future approaches and musings around Titus's story for future content, right? Like, his future appearances could easily go in these types of directions. It's so funny that my own shitter interpretation and understanding of his story is also the same sort of ideas and directions that even the original guy who made the story and the character in the first place, who helped to create that story, also had similar musings. That's interesting. I love to see that kind of sort of commonality, because it means that I'm not talking shit and not pulling random shit out of my ass just to make a point. I'm so glad and I'm so happy to see that I'm not the only one who saw an interesting sort of direction or parallel to where this could go for a character, for Titus's story. And apparently the director had all of that mapped out and planned out in the very first game. That's kind of funny. That's actually really cool. I'm actually kind of piqued by that. That's awesome. I love to see that kind of shit. I like to make those kinds of like sort of ideas and sort of interpretations, and then see those same sentiments echoed in other creative spaces, especially when it comes to like the people who make the stories in the first place. And I'm just like, I got you. I got you. I already figured it out. I deduced it. I deduced it. I already planned it. I saw that coming. I've already mapped it out in my head, and I already have it figured. Yep. Yep. Amazing. It's kind of a bit of an ego stroke for me. I'm sorry. I just kind of like, again, as an amateur writer and as someone who loves like consuming different types of stories and like engaging in different types of like games, movies, TV shows, mythologies, sort of, kind of, mostly history. I tend to really gravitate towards the fact that I have such a vast understanding of the creative process, to at least to some level of degree, that I can actually see the shit coming before it even actually, gets, either before it happens or before it is even documented as being a thing, right? I'm sorry. I'm being pedantic again. I'm
But
gonna shut
I
up
actually
again.
found this kind of fascinating. Sure, he says that by the end of the third game, Titus would come back around to being a hero. But that second game would have been one of those good old-fashioned dark middle chapters where he's acting as a renegade. Now,
Yeah, the Empire
unfortunately,
Strikes
the
Back
interviewer
effect.
didn't really pry into what's going on with him and his connection to the warp, but I'm certain that that would have played a major role in this. The fact that Titus's story arc was originally planned to take a dark turn like that adds a lot of credence to Leandros' accusations in the first game. In the official sequel, Titus ends up serving faithfully as a Black Shield in the Death Watch for 200 years, before proving his innocence and rejoining his brothers in the Ultramarines. In this version, he's a much more sympathetic and stoic character. And don't get me wrong, I like Titus well enough, he's one of my favorite Space Marine characters, but I can't help but think about what might have been. That whole renegade thing sounds admittedly kinda cool. Now I'm curious about what
I agree. Imagine if you could create your own homebrew in the third game. That would be fucking insane. Do you have any idea how cool that would be? You get to sit there and you get to make your own chapter, and it'd just be like as simple as just like, so Titus, now that we're kind of going rogue and we're kind of doing our own thing, what are we gonna do now? What are we gonna call ourselves? And then you get the choice of basically naming the new chapter that you will create, as well as choosing the color scheming, among other things. That would be so fucking dope. It is unreal. I would love to see it. Make it fucking happen. Whoever is gonna make Space Marines 3, I would love to. No, actually, that won't happen because he's firmly entrenched in the fucking Ultramarines now. Um, Fuck, that would be so cool though. Oh, the potential. Oh, the potential. Oh, god damn it. Uh, I'm sorry. I have to take a moment because the idea is just so good that I not only did I gravitate towards the idea initially in some of my musings and other 40K lore videos and contents. Um, I, like I was just spitballing, but the fact that it was actually hinted at being a possibility and was actually discussed for like a future sequel or entry that we never got is so fucking disappointing now. Oh. Anyways, I'm sorry. I'm gonna shut up. I'm gonna try and shut up. I'll shut up for the rest of the video. How about that? I've already made this video longer than is necessary. I'm just gonna shut up.
direction they're actually gonna go with both him and Leandros in the third game. There's something uniquely infuriating about characters like Leandros that are hard to fully articulate. Sure, we hate the villains of a story for their evil actions, but in settings like Warhammer 40K, those actions are often so cartoonishly over the top, so removed from real life, that they lose any sense of humanity. But betrayal, now that hits different. The dramatic irony of doing everything right, only to have someone you trust completely misunderstand your words, your actions, your intentions, and arrive at the worst possible conclusion about you, is something that we've all experienced at one point in our life or another. It's a painfully human experience. Communication is a flawed art, and even amongst the most well-intentioned people, it often breaks down. And when it does, it can leave long-lasting scars that mold our interactions with others. To me, that's why characters like Leandros get under my skin. Whether we realize it or not, they remind us of people we've known in real life. Someone who threw us under the bus, someone who misjudged us, someone who hid behind the rules instead of seeing the bigger picture. And in some cases, if we're being honest with ourselves, they might remind us of us, at least at one point in time. That, and let's be real, we hate them because nobody likes snitches. But just because we hate them, just because they're saying stuff no one wants to hear, doesn't always mean they're wrong. This is something that even someone like Captain Titus eventually has to confront.
Sir, I must apologize for my actions on Alvarez.
The best fucking scene in the game. God.
I fell prey to suspicion. Almost killed him.
When I was a young captain, one of my men questioned my motives, brushed his concerns aside, and I paid the price. Your suspicions arose because I failed to answer your doubts. As I failed to answer his.
Stand by for suborbital drop.
Still the best fucking scene in the game, guys.
As are we, brother.
At the end of this video, I'm going to be totally honest with you. I'm not really anticipating changing too many people's minds about Leandros. He's one of the most hated characters for a reason. He's not a character that you're supposed to like. The fact that to this day he's still considered one of the most hated characters in the franchise is testament to the fact that the original writers of the first game did a pretty damn good job with him. When I say I don't think he did anything wrong, I mean fully in the context of 40K's lore. In reality, he failed Titus just like Titus failed him. Ironically, for a character so intrinsically tied to the ideas of faith, Leandros could not trust that which he could not confirm for himself, and Titus made no attempt to calm his brother's fears. In the end, they're both flawed characters, but for different reasons, and it's kind of interesting seeing them grow in the second game, and I'm really hopeful for where they're going to go in the third. But what do you think of all this? Do you think Leandros was right about everything, or is he an utter failure as an Ultramarine? What do you think of that original plan for Titus's story where he becomes a renegade? Do you think we'll get some type of redemption arc for Leandros? I'm not gonna lie, I would love that, and it looks like he's gonna play a much larger role in the third game, and may even be a squad mate. It's definitely gonna be difficult for them to pull off, but if they make Leandros a badass capable of demonstrating a certain level of growth, I think they might be able to turn fan sentiment back in his favor. Don't forget to leave a comment telling me what you think down in the comment section below. If you like this video and you think I earned it, hit the subscribe button and ring the bell to be notified of more 40K videos like this one in the future. As always, big thanks to everyone who supports all the work that I do, and I'll catch you all in the next one.
Oh my god, I've been holding that in for a while. My brother in Christ, if they make Leandros a party member in the next game, they have to do this. They have to make his story work. They have to make his story mean something, right? They have to give us the reason, the necessary quote-unquote sort of like backstory musing as to why he is the way that he is, why he made that decision, why everything panned out the way that it did. And they need to conclude it by having both Titus and Leandros work together so significantly that they have to basically bridge that gap out of necessity rather than the rule, right? Because that's the only way this is going to go. Because unless you put them in a situation where they're going to have to hash this out, where they're going to have to constantly be at each other's throats, constantly contradicting one another, making, constantly questioning and second guessing each other's decisions, and constantly being at each other's throats over it, the only way they're going to move past this is if they get all of this shit out in the open, and they have their own sort of like, kind of like a Gadriel and Titus moments where they kind of have a little bit of a heart-to-heart, and then instead of, going on and just being like, I probably should have approached things differently, it should have more moments where it's just like, they see where each other are coming from, but they're both still very abstinent, I guess. Despondent. I don't know. The words are hard right now. I'm thinking too hard. They're too polarized in their own positions to really want to meet each other. And so a sentiment like, I had to make that decision. I've seen far too many commanders fall to the sort of bullshit that chaos can ensue, and I feel like my decision was the correct one given the circumstances. And then Titus could sit there, think about that for a second, muse on it for a moment. They have this silent moment, and then Titus is just like, maybe you had your reasons, but you ruined my life. You questioned my authority. You did all of these things, and that is something I can never forgive. Now we must go. We have more Xenos and other things to kill, right? It's going they need to have moments in the third game where they get progressively more at each other's throats and then have these sort of small little heart-to-heart moments before we finally get to the big one where they are just like they kind of recognize that this whole thing could have been all avoided if they were just both, if they both just stopped. I'm not. No, I'm done. I'm done. I'm done. I think you all see where I'm going with this. I think you all get the point. This video is becoming a little too long. I'm just going to cut it there. Thank you all so much for watching. And I shall see you all in the next video. Bye-bye. God.